So I think within that first two sessions, really helpful. I'm really grateful to Jeppe Bruce for spending the time with us to go through the political rationale of how they set up what they've done in Denmark, and also being honest about what some of the challenges are going forward. If I may say, we don't always get that level of candor from politicians these days, and I think that was great to have. And then I'm really grateful for our four panelists who joined us in the previous session on giving their perspective and again speaking with such candor. As you probably gathered, and even if you hadn't, you'd have figured it out yourself, a lot of what happens in Denmark, of course, is going to be influenced by what happens at the European Union level and indeed beyond. But we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so looking at this in the EU context, and I've got a fabulous panel to help me do that. So in no particular order, we've got Martin van Driel, who's joining us online. Martin, thank you so much indeed for your patience with my forbearance with my terrible timekeeping. Martin is with DG Agri in the European Commission in the unit dealing with the vision for the future of agriculture, and so I'm very much looking forward to his thoughts about where the vision goes, but also building on what we've heard in the Danish context. Blas Koenig from the European Environment Agency will be joined by Kiki Kuiper, who is a category lead for sustainability ruminants at Cargill, Simona Huiter, who is a senior advisor at Concito, and my great friend and colleague Jürgen Tax, Secretary General of the European Landowners Organization. Come on up, and we'll get going right away. It's free seating.
Okay, very good.
You were empowered to take your choice of seat. Okay, we're going to jump right into it. Martin, as you've sat there listening patiently to our discussions in the first session, as I said, really interested to hear your perspective on the vision of agriculture from DG Agri's perspective, and if you can and are willing, linking that back to what we've heard here in the room about the green transition that they're looking for in agri-food here in Denmark, that would be very well. And if you can do all that in 4 minutes, you'll be the hero of the day. Martin, over to you.
I think I now take an English approach. I mean, 4 minutes, that's of course impossible, but no, I'll try. So no, thank you very much for your kind announcement, and thanks for inviting me to such a distinguished panel. In 4 minutes, so if I talk about the vision is it's no more than, if you want, sort of a roadmap of ideas that we want to put forward, and then we want to put these ideas forward in discussions with all kind of stakeholders. So in a bottom-up approach, so a bit different from what we've done under the previous regime, the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork. So it's a change of approach, and that we recognize agriculture as a strategic asset, notably, of course, around food security. Not that there is an immediate problem of food security, but I mean, we should not take it for granted. And we have a number of, let's say, dependencies that can quickly turn into vulnerability. So we need to reduce those. So in the vision, we have a number of priority areas. We define it. We want to have an attractive agricultural sector. We want to have agricultural resilience towards geopolitical shocks, but also climate. We want farming to go hand in hand with nature. I think that fits best into the topic of this panel or this afternoon. And we want to achieve or have vibrant rural areas. So in that vision, there are a number of, let's say, more concrete actions. So I don't go into detail on all of them within these 4 minutes, but we have we want to come up with a generational renewal strategy soon. We are working already on a livestock work stream, which is not only addressing, let's say, as we call them, the hotspots, so areas where there are a lot of livestock, but also areas which are in risk of abandonment, so where there's not enough livestock or farming at all. And another important element in the vision is that we will work towards reciprocity in terms of our external trade. So all these 4 priorities, they should be within an enabling environment so that research and innovation can sort of help all 4 priorities, which are all interlinked. Now, as far as we are concerned in DG Agri, of course, the first thing you think about is the Common Agricultural Policy. But this vision is not only about the Common Agricultural Policy. It's also about providing additional market incentives, what member states can do, and there, of course, the Danish example comes in. But we also rely on other Directorate Generals. I work in Directorate General Agri, but also Directorate General for Climate, for Environment, Sante, so for food security. They are all involved in different actions that we have foreseen, because it's not only a vision on agriculture, it's a vision for agriculture and food. A number of things are already set in motion. So, for example, simplification. And one of the criticisms on the Common Agriculture Policy is, and other regulations, that is very complicated. So we have a simplification package just presented on the 14th of May. And we have already a proposal to strengthen the position of farmers in the food chain via the Common Market Organization and the unfair trading practices. Now, focusing a little bit on the Common Agriculture Policy, how will that look like? So first of all, it will be presented at the same time as the new multi-annual financial framework of the EU will be presented in mid-July, and the agriculture will, well, basically go back to a certain number of basic policy objectives, and we will give further responsibility, even more than under the current CAP strategic plans, further responsibility and accountability for the member states to reach those objectives. So that will be, let's say, the architecture of the new Common Agricultural Policy. So, and then to get to the point that we're discussing about here, that farming must go hand in hand with nature. How can we, let's say, help this transition? Well, we have the Common Agriculture Policy. There is a certain funding attached to it. So, and there we want to focus our efforts, well, let's say, to target our efforts better than the current Common Agriculture Policy. We now give more or less all farmers who have a hectare of land to get a certain amount, and if you have more hectares, you get more and more money. We want to focus it, and you can focus it on certain farming sectors, you can focus it on certain sizes of farmers, but you can also focus it on certain objectives, read environmental objectives. So that's one of the things that we want to elaborate further, and we want to elaborate, as we said, it in dialogue with the stakeholders, but also, of course, with the member states. So one of the things that is in the vision is a benchmarking system, so that we want to see what kind of parameters we need to collect or are already collected on the different schemes, that we can put them together so that the farming community can see how sustainable they are or not, or comparing it to others. So that's one concrete action that is proposed in the vision. The other thing, of course, is that the CAP cannot finance everything. I've seen, for example, the costs of your Danish system. Well, that's impossible to bear those costs only from the Common Agriculture Policy. So we also rely on, well, first of all, the national member states budget, but also on possibly market incentives. So in the vision, we talk about carbon farming and about nature credits. So those elements and the nature credits, for example, are already being developed as we speak by DG Environment. And then if you look at the rest in the chapter of, let's say, sustainable agriculture, we will present a bioeconomy strategy in the coming days. There will be a water resilience strategy. We will work on the faster approval of biopesticides. And there is an evaluation of the nitrates directive, and all these legislation together will have to sort of link with agriculture, not only that agriculture becomes more sustainable, but also that at the same time those who work in agriculture will still earn a decent income, because without earning a decent income, the farmers cannot make the change to a more sustainable farming system. So that is, I think, the essence of what we have in the vision. So without concrete action plans of what we want to do, what legislation we want to produce within X number of days, we want to work on those streams to get it right towards the future. I hope that stayed a bit within the 4 minutes, but I'm happy to take any questions in the debate. Thank you.
Martin, I wasn't looking at my watch, so there's no way for me to tell whether you stayed within the 4 minutes, but for argument's sake, we'll say that you did. Thank you so much indeed. I am now going to break the 4 minutes by asking you a couple of quick follow-up questions. You know, I think one thing that is inspiring about the vision in the same way as what we've seen in Denmark is that I think we're asking the right questions, and some would argue, for the first time we're asking the right questions. Now we're into the difficult bit, as we are in Denmark, in how do we do the implementation. And something you said there about the different DGs that are involved in driving the implementation. Here in Denmark, you've effectively got a Ministry for Implementation. How, and I know you're not a politician, so feel free to deflect the question in any way you see fit. How confident are you that there is an aligned view across the different directorates in the Commission that ensures that we are getting this systemic approach to policy and legislation? And then my second question is going to be, how are you working with the private sector to drive some of the implementation that they're going to have to play a role in if your objectives are going to be met?
Yeah, thank you very much. So on your first question, the best answer I can give there is that we have, let's say, we have an overarching project group, as we call it, in the Commission. So there are all the commissioners that are involved in the implementation of the vision. So there's not only the Commissioner for Agri, but also the Commissioner for Sante, the Commissioner for Environment, Grow, etc. They get together from time to time to discuss the political, let's say, priorities, because it's clear that if you, for example, want to work on a proposal for biopesticides, it will be DG Sante who does that. So that commissioner must be on board to deliver on that part. So in the discussions, the project group, let's say the politicians, the commissioners, they will decide, they will tell the different DGs, let's say people like me, how to deliver, when to deliver, and what to deliver. So that is, let's say, the implementation, but it's not an implementation ministry, but it's called a project group. I mean, that looks like a similar wording, no? It's a bit semantics. And then the other part, the other question, I think I already forgot it. It goes so fast.
But probably because I wasn't clear enough in articulating
the private
sector.
How can we involve the private sector? Well, that probably does not go by itself, but I mean, let's say, first of all, we already have, let's say, the tools to, that's a proposal in any case, to give the farmers a bit more power in the market. So that is where we can, let's say, liberalize some market parties to do a number of things, because if farmers need to do efforts to become more sustainable, to make more cost, they want to see those costs rewarded in towards the selling price of their products. And with these, let's say, provisions to give them more power in the market, they can probably achieve that. So that's one way. The other thing, let's say, the carbon market, if you want it, or the nature credits. Yeah, I mean that is also, we have to see how companies would be interested in it. But if there is all kind of legislation to reduce your carbon footprint, you might be interested in taking products from farmers who do carbon farming, so who sequester carbon in the soil, and then be ready to pay for it. I mean, it already on a smaller scale, it happens here and there. So that is what we want to scale up a bit. So that's where I see the market comes in. On the other hand, of course, it's almost inevitable. If you are a company and you want to have your raw material to process, you will need to sort of get to an agreement, an alignment, or whatever you want to call it, with the farmer, with your supplier. Otherwise, neither the farmer nor the processors will survive. So in the end, they will get together and find a solution that I'm not certain about. I hope that answers that question.
Sure does. Thank you, Martin. I would also say, I think, in fairness as well, the vision is also clear about trying to bring in the role of the private sector, and also private financial institutions and insurance companies as well, which is a key part, at least in my view, of that financing the transition. So, Martin, thanks so much indeed. I hope you can stay with us as we flow through this this panel session. I'm going to bring in the panelists now. I'm going to start with you, Jürgen Tack, Secretary General, European Landowners Organization, for a couple of reasons. One, like Anne-Sophie, you represent landowners, farmers. You were also somehow connected into the strategic dialogue. You've seen that develop. You're a member of the European Board for Agriculture and Food, which is advising Commissioner Hansen. I'm going to start with the same questions really that I put to the previous panel. I mean, how confident are you that the road that we've set out on here is actually going to deliver the results that we want and perhaps avoid some of the mistakes that we've made in the past?
Do we ever avoid mistakes of the past? I'm not sure about that. But let's say, first of all, let me make the difference about a strategic dialogue where you had 29 experts around the table. We were coming to a kind of consensus agreement on a document. Then we have the vision, which in reality is a more political document coming from Commissioner Hansen, but which is largely based on what the strategic dialogue did. And now we have EBAF, the European Board on Agriculture and Food, which is, let's say, bringing together 30 representatives now, not longer experts, but representatives of organizations around the table, let's say, advising and discussing elements of the vision in function of a support to Commissioner Hansen. What is absolutely great to see is that we have again a commissioner with a serious interest in farming. And with the vision, we have, I think, a document which is recognizing farming as a strategic sector towards food security, towards a vibrant rural life, towards the stewardships of European landscapes. So I think that's absolutely positive. What I'm a little bit afraid of is that throughout the document, we are reading that, let's say, the public support should go especially to those who need it the most, which is politically, of course, very convenient, but which is economically and ethically flawed for me. If we give subsidies to someone who is having solar panels, we do that in function of production. Here, for one or the other reason, we want to go and give subsidies to farmers who are in need of those subsidies. And for some groups, I can understand that. I can understand that, let's say, young farmers, you want to give them some support. Agricultural land is expensive, so they can use that. You can do that to new farmers, to farmers which have natural constraints on their land. But then you have that notion to give subsidies to small farmers. At a certain moment, I made a joke towards Commissioner Hansen asking what exactly is a small farmer, whether that is someone below 1.5 meters. But okay, it seems to be more and more in the discussion coming to farmers which have at maximum 50 hectares of land. And then I think we are making a major mistake, because it is not the small farmer as such who is able to deliver most to productivity, nor to deliver most towards sustainability. And I'm sure that we have small farmers who are able to do so, and very happy that they are making use of those subsidies. But if farmers with more than 50 hectares are able to contribute to those objectives, they should be able to participate in the subsidies in function of the land they can provide. We have to make sure that, let's say, the common agriculture policy is not becoming a social welfare subsidy, because that's, I think, something we do not need. We have a number of objectives in the common agriculture policy. It's productivity, it's sustainability. So let's make sure that we are capable of giving those subsidies to those who are able to deliver specifically on those objectives. And that is something where we have to take care of that we are not going into that, let's say, direction which is for many people an ideal vision of farming, but which is not delivering on the objectives.
So I am going to push you, because you didn't answer my question. How confident are you that this is going to lead us to where, at least in your view, we need to be?
Well, let's say we will take a number of steps, but if we are not capable of recognizing, let's say, the role, and I come back, I'm very sorry, of farmers, landowners, who are able to deliver at a larger size, I'm very certain when we are not going to reach that.
Yeah.
Because we are not going to reach those very big goals just by promoting small land ownership, small farmers.
Yeah.
They will not be able to deliver on that.
Thank you. Sonia, I'm going to bring you in and kind of work our way down the panel now. You've had the opportunity, both in this room and no doubt given the role that you have in looking at sustainable food systems. You've listened to what we've heard about Denmark. You obviously understand where we are at the EU level. Where do you think we are on this journey towards creating more resilient, sustainable agri-food systems? And I'm also going to put the same hope question to you. Are you hopeful that we will get there?
Yeah, so I'm Simone, and I come from Concito, which is a climate think tank based here in Copenhagen. And I was a bit inspired by Hanne's question, how many farmers is in the room? And since we're talking a lot about how agri-food systems align with climate change, so I just wanted to ask how many people in this room is worried about climate change? Yeah. So that's very interesting to see, and I think it's also why we're here today to talk about, where should we go? How do we develop the system to become more sustainable and more climate aligned? And I think today we have quite a strong food and agriculture system in the EU, like also from a global perspective. We have pretty good strategic autonomy, but it could be improved. But we do have some very big challenges ahead when coming from a climate perspective, both in terms of food production, where we see that food production is highly challenged by the climate crisis and the climate impact, which really threaten our resilience in our agri-food system. At the same time, when we look at the current policy mix we have for agriculture, we see that the emissions from agriculture are only very gradually going down. We see the carbon stored in our forest and in our soils is decreasing. We have less and less carbon in these soils and in the forest. So we really have a problem with helping the sectors contribute to our common goals. So I think that is an issue, and it's not to blame the farmers or the foresters, because the reason why we also see this is because there is a demand for these products. It's not coming out of the blue, like we're just emitting because we don't, because we want to. It's because there is a demand, but it's also because we lack incentives that will really help the sector go in the direction that we need to go to reach our climate ambitions. And then when we have a vision now, and I think we need a vision. We need something to strive towards, something that motivates us, something that's good for people and planet. It's much better to have a vision than to have all scary pictures. So we need a vision, but when I read the vision, I don't feel so inspired. I don't feel like it's visionary. It's more a patchwork of aspirations. So I don't see a clear roadmap towards where we need to go. And I think that's a bit of a problem.
Simona, let me just push a little bit on that there, and it might be unfair to put you on the spot. If it's not particularly visionary, if it's not quite the roadmap that you were looking for, what are the elements that we need to put in there that would turn it into that? I mean, you talked about incentives, both public and private. Is that part of what's missing?
Yeah, so we can reflect a little bit on the previous conversation, and then some things that is actually going on also inside the Commission. But just to what have we learned a bit from the Danish case is that change is actually possible. Change can happen also within the agriculture sector. We can together with the right policy package and design that identifies who's the winners and who are the losers, and how can we support those who have the biggest challenge in the transition to help get there. And I think the key ingredients for that deal was political ambitions, science-based approaches, dialogue and trust, compromise and pragmatism. So I think we need to bring that even further to the European level, and like what I'm still like missing when I'm looking at the vision, and then what I also know the Commission is working on is the 2040 climate target that will be set this year. And we know that agriculture have to play a bigger role, and the land use sector, to reach a more ambitious climate target. So we know that parts of the Commission are working on how do we develop a climate policy for agriculture. And I think we should discuss that, because we don't want it to happen in a vacuum. We want to discuss this and to find, a bit like we did with the Danish deal, the right policy mix and the right policy framework, so we know that it's ambitious, but it's also fair for those who are impacted by it.
That's great, and you've anticipated my third follow-up question, which is what can we learn from Denmark? So thank you so much indeed for also saving us some time there as we move through it. Just before I bring in Kiki, Blaž Koenig from European Environment Agency, when you listen to what Simona and Jürgen and also Martin have said, I mean, it's a similar question to you. You know, from your perspective, where are we on this journey, and how hopeful are you that we are going to be able to address some of the things that Simona was just saying, things that are missing?
Yeah, thanks. I'm coming from the Environment Agency, and I'm in charge of the Climate Risk and Resilience Unit there. And I will talk from that perspective, because I didn't hear so much about that in this. You know that Europe is the fastest warming continent, no? We are basically the highest impact of climate change are happening in Europe. Europe is also one of the richest continents, so we are also less vulnerable. We are quite resilient. But imagine what would be if we are basically losing the resilience. In the last 44 years, we have lost, because of the weather and climate extremes, 780 billion euros in Europe, not only on agriculture, but everywhere. No? And agriculture sector is the most exposed sector to climate change. And 2022 was a drought year in Europe. 40 billion euros were lost because of the drought. Currently, 40%, at this stage today, 40% of the European continent is in drought. And then we are basically asking how we should make sure that the agriculture is more resilient, and how the agriculture can contribute to the climate targets and so on. Only the resilient agriculture can contribute to the climate and sustainability targets. So we need to focus. We need to turn a little bit the narrative around, and actually looking into the how to make the sector resilient, how to make the sector that basically is producing what it needs to produce, so basically food, how to make sure that we are secure, because we are now competing, or we are like now in this kind of polarized world when USA is doing something and we don't want to trade, or at least some of the people don't want, and so we need to make sure that agriculture in Europe delivers what they need to deliver. And that's actually a big challenge. And then I was listening in previous sector about deregulation and how we should actually make that everything is implemented faster and faster. I think there is, of course, a way to do that more, because we need to, of course, work on all these kind of systemic aspects. But on the other hand, we also need to make sure that we are producing a healthy, sustainable food for us, because the healthy society means resilient society, no? And that's the whole challenge. And I think this systemic approach to agriculture is missing sometimes, no? And tell you where we are on this journey, we need to also start looking from the resilience perspective, how resilient we are to climate shocks, because can happen that you have a big drought in Europe and the agriculture production can decrease to the level that we will not have enough to feed Europe. Now, of course, because we are a rich continent, we can import, no? And we will not suffer because of that. But there's also, you know, different societal groups. There's a just resilience we need to focus on as well, that everyone has affordable food in Europe. And that's something which we need to put in the middle of the vision of the agriculture. It's about the resilience, the sustainability, and you know, also preserving the rural life. And that's partially what I see, which is missing in the vision of agriculture, no? This resilient aspect and resilience to climate change. It is in, but I think more should be done on that one, no?
So there's a common theme emerging really across all the voices that we have, and I don't want to anticipate what you're going to say, Kiki, that, you know, we're all kind of aligning around the what, but the how is missing. Let me just come back to one thing that you said, and it was brought up in the previous panel as well. You said we don't think about it systemically. What stops us, from your point of view, from your vantage point in the European Environment Agency, from thinking systemically?
Because it's complicated.
Right.
And we don't want to have a complicated solutions because it's easier to make a simple solutions. No? It goes a bit of this kind of philosophical discussion, which I don't want to go too much in. But you know, the whole decision making is done that we are still deciding based on partial. No? So basically, we are still, you know, organizing ourselves. That decision on agriculture is with the agriculture ministry, decision on health is with health ministry, and so on and so forth. And the previous speaker from the commission already said that this is already happening now.
Yeah.
We are breaking these silences, no? And I think this needs to be more and more. And it's I see also that is getting in the right direction, but still, how to make you know, simple solutions which can be easily to implement, where the problem is complex, it's difficult. And implementation usually needs to be a straightforward, linear way of doing it, because otherwise you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And at the end, implementation happens in this kind of forum, which we are today discussing, at the farmer's level.
Yeah.
And needs to be straightforward and easy to implement. And that's a problem. And that's, you know, the thing how we should make it better, because the whole, this kind of solution, or let's say the whole problem is complex, no? And we don't want to have a complex one. No?
Yeah, it feels like we need to find a way to cut through that. Kiki Kuiper from Cargill, obviously one of the biggest agri-businesses in the world. I don't want to distract you from what we asked you to talk about, which is also where we are on the journey. But I mean, your company is involved in bringing forward innovation and solutions that can help farmers to respond to the demands that are being put on them, the food system to respond to the demands that is being put on it. As you tell us where you think we are on the journey, there's a sense of whether or not what you're hearing today is giving you cause for optimism or cause for concern about whether or not you're going to have the environment of certainty to bring forward the solutions and innovation that farmers and the food system want.
Thank you. And to maybe clarify a little bit, so I work for Cargill Animal Nutrition, so I am
Important clarification.
Very much in the middle of the supply chain, right? So we source crops, we produce compound feed, and then we feed the animals, which is also how we are helping farmers reduce emissions. And one of the biggest things that we are seeing, that I'm experiencing also in my daily job, is we cannot do this alone. So we really need to work with everyone along the chain, right? We have our own targets. We have our scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 targets to reduce emissions from what we source. But we need innovation, we need R&D. And when we bring those innovations to the market to help everyone reach that common goal, because that's also what I'm hearing a lot, is that everyone has this common goal. We need a more resilient agri-food system. We need to reduce emissions. Arla has their targets, we have our targets, we have national targets, everyone has targets, we need to do this together. And for me, that is really also key. And that's also, I think, where we are in a lot of pilots, we're doing a lot of trials. What is missing is sort of the common standard, I would say, especially on a European level, that we are working on a country-to-country basis. So here in Denmark, we have a perfect example. We have that carbon tax system. In the Netherlands, we have a whole other carbon accounting system. In Belgium, in Flanders, farmers, they have their covenant enteric emissions ruminants, where farmers can choose to feed or implement one of 5 feeding strategies to reduce enteric emissions, right, from methane, which is working to some extent, but it's also an example of how, as a government, you can really facilitate, together with the private sector, change on farm. And that's also what I like, you know, what you said, but also what everyone here said, that systematic approach. We need to see what's the win for everyone. And I think where we are on the journey right now, we have the technologies. We have Silver, DSM has Bover, you know, we have technologies, we have the R&D, we have the scientific evidence. Very good point that you brought up, like we need to have the science and robust data-driven decisions. We need to move beyond the pilot scale. We need to move to large-scale implementation, but to do that, we need the right policy framework, right? We need to ensure that this is not something we do over the next 2 years, but something that can help change the system.
One of my observations over the last couple of years, which certainly gives me cause for optimism, is not just the extent to which companies like Cargill, Arla, others that are part of the forum, others that are beyond the forum, have stepped up and have started to invest. I mean, I think you all always were, but you've really put your shoulder to the wheel. Perhaps what might be missing is the degree of collaboration within the value chain between the companies that might be pre-competitive and saying, well, okay, that is what the standard is that we're going to work towards, and it's not going to be this is what I want as Cargill or this is what I might want as PepsiCo. Do you think that collaboration is starting to come together?
Yes, and a lot, I would say. I think there's a lot of groups actually very similar to this one, where multiple companies together with NGOs, farmer organizations are trying to come together. And what I really am very optimistic about, usually in those groups, the farmers are central, right? The farmer cannot end up paying the bill to keep producing food that we then consume. That's not fair in any sense. But I think one of the difficult things is actually also the amount of different standards and outcomes that there are. And I think that's also touched upon in the EU vision, right? That simplification bit. There is so much work to be done, kind of to just want to simply reduce a ton of CO2, that you cannot reduce simply a ton of CO2. You need to account that there is about 27 different protocols to account for greenhouse gas emission reduction based on the different products that you use or different systems. So collaboration is definitely there, but because many of the companies are also operating in different countries, we all have to stick to different kinds of rules, and the big denominator, essentially, that's...
So maybe just bring you back in on this, Simona. We talked a bit about your perspective on the vision, which is very public sector facing. Give us your perspective on the private sector then, their role in producing the sustainable food system that we want. Kiki's touched on innovation, on collaboration. We're seeing more finance come in. From your perspective, do you see the same? Does it give you cause for optimism? And how do we fuse these two things together, the public and the private? Because it still sometimes feels to me that that one is driven by the other, and usually public into private rather than private into public. How do we break that down?
But I think the private sector needs a clear direction of travel. And then I think the private sector is really willing to follow and to support and invest. And I think as long as there is no carbon price for emission and uptake in the land sector, I think it's difficult for the private sector. Then you will have we do this, we do that, we do this. As long as there is no common framework for that, I think it's very difficult for private sector to really navigate the agriculture sector and land use sector. So I think that is one of the answers. And I think when observing some of the big players that are really pushing a lot of ambitious strategies and hopefully also implementing, they are sometimes ahead of governments. And you saw Arla had their incentive model before we had the Danish tax. So you see that, and companies are really good at experimenting. So governments can learn from what private sector has already been doing, and then they can kind of mainstream and provide common kind of framework and guidelines. So private sector know what to tap into. They know what to invest in. What will the future look like? So yeah, I think that is what is needed. And this voluntary carbon credit system, I don't think we will get what we need from that, because we will have a common carbon certification framework, but that's only if companies want to, a European stamp. This carbon credit is European standard, but it won't provide the direction of travel in the terms of what is the target, where do we need to go, what are the crucial investments here. So I think that's is what we need.
It's a really interesting point that you were making there that certainly resonates with me. I think it came out of discussion that Hannah and I were having beforehand. There's a question about how do you accelerate and tap into what the private sector is already doing. I think both of you have mentioned that, and I do sometimes wonder, and I include myself to the extent that I've worked in the public sector, I wonder how much we think about it in those terms. How do we accelerate and build on what the private sector is already doing, rather than perhaps maybe trying to replicate it or even slow it down by trying to get to too low a standard. But another question. I want to bring Martin back in to just reflect and perhaps his observations on what Blaž and Kiki and Simona and Jürgen have said. But before I do that, I just want to also open up to the audience here. Is there any kind of questions, reflections, observations that you have on what you've heard from our esteemed panelists? Yes, sir. Once again, the microphone in the front. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. There's just one thing that you also mentioned, that small seems to be wonderful and beautiful, and big is bad. And another thing that has sort of been in the debate and in the sort of mixed into the politics that is made by the European Union is that particular issue. And another issue, the organic production. You were talking about 40% drought in Europe. We have less and less land. We are talking about a lot of land taken out in Denmark now. And we were talking about producing more on less land. That is really not organic. And I still have not seen that it has been taken out of the ambitions for the European Union to actually count on up to 35% of organic production. And that is also related to small in some way or another. So I would like to you to focus on that issue and tell me, where are we?
Yeah. Jürgen and
Yeah, well, on organic, first of all, let it be clear, it's for organic, you do not have to be small. No. I also have very good examples of big firms which are organic. I think the European Commission made a major mistake with putting a 25% target. Let's say producing 25% of organic food, if there is only a market for 5 to 10% share, is problematic, because then you're producing much more than what your market is ready for. And we have seen in the last years that, let's say, the price of organic food is decreasing, while in reality it should increase to make sure that people who are working on organic are getting a kind of benefit for the extra work they are doing. That has a lot to do with how consumers are looking at food. And I have to say, I'm a biologist, my wife is a biologist, but if we are in a supermarket in the weekend and we are still having that doubt whether you're going to take one or the other, I'm very sorry, if today you want to have a look at the packaging of food, you need and a PhD and some reading glasses, because otherwise you are not able to find out anymore what happens. But for 95% of the consumers, it's still the price who's going to be the one thing on which you decide. And then I can only come to the conclusion that, let's say, the most environmental friendly products are certainly not the cheapest ones. No, that are the most expensive ones. And I think that is something we have to turn around. And that's something we can only do when throughout the complete value chain, from farmers, but including the agri-food companies, is making sure that you're gaining more money with those products which are environmental more friendly. And we are far from that.
Blaž.
Yeah, just to add on a couple of these aspects. Firstly, about the size of the farms. If you look at from the climate resilience perspective, it's a difference if the small farm or a big farm, how actually you can adapt to climate change. And that's something which is also needs to be put into the consideration, because you need to then support also the smaller farms to also increase the adaptation actions. Maybe in the bigger farms, if you are more like focus on one, let's say, output, the resilience is lower, because if drought comes and you are basically focusing only one product, then the production goes down and the economy of the farming can actually also goes very low. And then it comes back to the organic farming. And again, to me, organic farming is not only about the price which you pay in the shop, it's also about the societal price. If you eat better food, you are healthier. And that basically is a cost of the society if there is a big share of the society which needs to have a, let's say, unhealthy life. No? And I think this needs to be incorporated also in the thinking. It's not only about the production because of the labeling and it's more costly, it's also about overall cost of the society when you need to, you know, have less, let's say, healthy society. And we have some example around Europe, around the world, but basically when you focus on the very much processed food, what can happen in the society when the cost of the health system is getting then higher and higher. And when it goes back to as a society, as a people, we are paying back to that. No? And that's also which needs to be considered. Organic, it's also healthier, or should be healthier.
I was about to say, I agree with almost everything you said until the last bit about organic is healthier. Question mark, as somebody said in the audience. But I think you make a really important point, which also goes to the point about the complexity. If through healthier food, the health budget goes down, can we reallocate the money from the health budget to the food and agriculture system to ensure that it is producing the food that makes us healthier? And that's the virtuous circle that we're looking at, which of course is very easy for me to sit here on a panel and say that. I have absolutely no idea how you would implement it. Yes, sir. We're going to do one more from the audience, and then we're going to bring Martin back in.
Thank you. Johannes Flatz, also from the think tank Concito, and I would like to ask a follow-up question to Jürgen, if I may. You just said at the end of your remark that you think the most environmentally damaging products should be more expensive than the environmentally friendly ones. Isn't then a carbon tax on emissions a very good idea, because that would exactly do that, put a price on those products that are more environmentally damaging? Thank you.
Let's say I think carbon tax, if implemented in the right way, can be part of a solution. Let's say if you do that just in Denmark, then let's say you have a problem, because the factory just on the other side of the border is having a competitive advantage all of a sudden, even if that company is doing exactly the same as a company in Denmark. But let's say taxation is one element, subsidies are another element. You can make a mix to make sure that, let's say, the farmer who is producing the most environmental product is also getting most of the money. But then it has to be clear that has no relation to size, that has no relation to whatever. You have to go and look into the full process. And that's something politicians often forget, because they are focusing on a single aspect. And carbon tax could be part of a solution, but is for me not the solution, because carbon is one element out of the many we have to look into.
And it's how you put all those many together into one. I'm going to invite Simona, Kiki, and Blaž and Jürgen to make one final comment just before we close this panel. But before we do, Martin, let me bring you back in. You've been no doubt listening diligently to the observations on the vision and other things from our esteemed panelists here. Any reflections, anything that resonated, anything you'd like to add to, or perhaps even challenge that you've heard in the last 30 minutes or so?
Yes, I think so. So well, the first thing, of course, it's a bit, well, I mean, maybe a disappointment for me that I hear that it's just, the vision is just a patchwork of aspirations, and it doesn't think systemically and stuff like that. Well, I think, of course, I have to admit that, I mean, I can go along with that to a certain extent. On the other hand, I mean, if you read the whole vision, it covers almost the whole spectrum, you know, from agriculture to food. and it prescribes a number of let's say work streams or strategies or whatever that have to be implemented, that have to sort of become more concrete. But then I think everything that is currently at stake in the agri-food chain is more or less addressed. Huh? So and then we come to the second thing. That is, if you really want to make it a complete strategy where everything is included, you also need a decent amount of money. If I look at what this Danish plan costs, I mean, that's nowhere near what the European Commission or what the EU can provide in terms of agriculture and food support. So there is a similar program that was at once developed in the Netherlands that was 25 billion that they had available, and the Dutch, they get 700 to 800 million per year from the CFP. So the difference are just enormous. So if you want to implement all these actions in a systemic way, including land shifts, then you need a lot of money, which needs to come from the national coffers and cannot come from the EU alone. So that is one. Then on the smallest beautiful discussion, that's always a fascinating discussion, of course. I mean, I can to a certain extent agree with that, but if you look at the vision, it also says that we want to focus on those farmers that are producing food. So that's already a change. It's not just that they are being small and doing nothing or producing for themselves. So there we can have a bit of an influence on who we support and who we do not support. And in terms of resilience of your whole, let's say, farming system, it's not necessarily bad that there are also, let's say, quite a number of relatively smaller farmers who are in the system and can, let's say, take over if a smaller farmer, or if a bigger farmer stops or whatever. Because if you only have these big farms and one is going bankrupt or falls away or I don't know what, I mean, then maybe your farm stops, no? So if there are many farmers, then your risk is just less. There are always people available to take over. So from that perspective of resilience, I think small farmers do have a role to play. The other thing was on the organic, that's the debate that we always have on organic. Do you set yourself a target of how much we're going to produce? Or do we only look at the demand side? Do we see how much demand there is for organic product? That's all fair. First of all, the 25% organic is an ambition. It's not really a target. I mean, in the CAP strategic plans, there is almost no member state who achieves the 25%. We didn't punish them for that. Huh? It was based on needs assessment and SWOT and whatever we did. There's no punishment. It is an ambition. We want to have, let's say, more organic, but of course it must be in line with the demand. So also what is mentioned in the vision, there are a number of things on the consumer side, and one of them is, for example, procurement. And if we want to allow more, for example, organic or local products in procurement contracts, in public procurement, so to feed hospitals, prisons, whatever, that's a lot of that covers a lot of demand. And if you can introduce there more organic, that would then, let's say, be an incentive for organic demand, which will then also have an effect on organic production. So I'm aware that you should look at both sides and not only at the supply side, but I think, I mean, if you then look at the vision, it would almost become a systemic approach. That's what I want to leave. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And of course, we should always stand back, but both in Denmark and at the EU level, and say, you know, it's easy to challenge. It's harder to put something in place. That's what you've done. It's catalyzed a discussion, and hopefully will help us to lead to the right points. We're woefully over time again. I know, Lars, you've got to run. So let's do a final 10 seconds from each. Your closing key takeaway on what you're going to do about it. Off.
10 seconds, wow.
Well, you've got the meeting at 4:30.
I can be a bit late.
Not too late.
No, it's really interesting discussion, bringing all these kind of aspects together. One thing which maybe I didn't say it so much, but also we need to start thinking, it's also a justice approach, just resilience approach in all the system, because you know there will be soon parts of Europe where the climate change will be so, let's say, the impact will be so high that the agriculture will be challenged. Yeah. So what to do with the farmers there? Not to just forget about them, we need to start transforming the system. And this is something which needs to be also considered in the overall, let's say, approach of justice to those who basically will not able to do the agricultural farming anymore because the climate impacts will be just so high that basically agricultural production will not be able to happen anymore. And I think this we need to put it in as well.
Kiki?
For me, I would say it's about, first and foremost, farmer recognition, which is in multiple ways. It can be in financial incentives, but also on a European or on a national level, that their efforts are being reflected in emission reduction. And we have solutions. Technology is there. We have the R&D, we have the science. I think it's about having that one big overarching common goal that all of us can work towards to make that happen, to realize that at a large scale.
Great point. Simona?
Yeah, I guess we are also here today because we are talking about the EU presidency. And right now, I believe we have a window of opportunity for agriculture. We have the upcoming budget, the MFF. We have the new CAP, which is coming out at the same time. We have the European 2040 climate target. Let's align these policies, and let's make a policy mix for agriculture that is both resilient and reduce the emissions and increase the uptake.
Nice way to end. Jürgen, top that.
I would say if we do that, let's make sure that we do that immediately in the right time frame. A farmer who is making a decision on an investment will pay for it for the next 30 years. The CAP is changing every 7 years. Politicians are going home after 5 years, and climate and biodiversity solutions, we have to do them by tomorrow morning, or it will be too late. We have to make sure that the 30 years investment period and the urgent needs, that we can join them. So for that, I say we don't only need a vision on paper, but we really need a political vision where we make sure that investment made can be stable for a longer time than they are today. As long as we are not able to do that, we will need agricultural subsidies in the future.
Very good. It sounds like we're ending this panel where we finished the last one, which is reasons for hope, but also reasons and caution, perhaps, in terms of how we proceed. Martin, Jürgen, Simona, Kiki, Blaž, thank you so much indeed. Let's give them a warm round of applause. Thank you.